In 2006, I moved into a high-rise apartment building in Hamilton at the intersection of King Street East and Emerald Street North. The building was built in the 1970s, and it served since then as a facility for government-subsidized housing. Most of the tenants were on government support, and many were elderly or mentally disturbed. I was not on assistance. I paid full market rent for my unit on the 21st floor. Almost immediately, strange things began to happen. The most common strange occurrences were an intense shaking of my bedroom closet door, strange footsteps, raspy voices, and the sound of a ball bouncing. On various occasions, I was woken up in the night by what sounded like a person punching and kicking the sliding doors on my closet. I would often yell at it to stop, and it would, immediately. This would happen about once or twice a month. I took to leaving my fan on at night to drown out these strange noises. Almost every night, I would hear what sounded like feet shuffling around my living room floor, as if an old man were trying to walk. Strange, undecipherable whispers were often heard at night. I got used to the strange sounds and goings, but nothing would prepare me for what happened in February 2008. That night, my girlfriend was sleeping over when everything happened all at once. The door would rattle violently, and we heard footsteps all over the apartment and bedroom. My girlfriend kept complaining of feeling a presence as if something evil was leaning over the bed and staring at us. As I tried to calm her down and explain that these things happen all the time and it's never hurt me, I heard an old woman's voice scream in my ear, as clear as day. I screamed in fear and we left that night to stay with a friend. I would often have friends over from Waterloo on weekends, who always seemed uneasy in the apartment. They refused to stay the night on the pull-out couch due to strange noises they heard. Once, I left them to go to the store. When I returned, they were standing in the hallway looking uneasy. They told me that my place freaked them out and they wanted to go out for the night instead of staying at my place. It got to a point when my friends didn't want to come over anymore. Sometime in late 2007, I would hear what sounded like a ball bouncing. It was as if someone dropped the ball and let it bounce until it stopped. This would happen the same time every night, 10 to 10:30 p.m. I moved out last winter, and I have not experienced anything like that since. A friend of mine who came over several times recently told me that she heard distant voices and heard footsteps when no one was there. We agreed that this was a poltergeist and not a ghost of the deceased.
This story is fairly brief, as the incident was rather brief in itself. I am currently a mature student at a college in Bedfordshire, studying fine art in a specialist art block. To make sure I get the best use of the studio, I often stay after normal hours to do extra work. Now, the art block consists of 2 floors, and the studio I work in is on the top floor. Usually there is staff or a few students wandering about, but on this occasion, it happened to be an open day and everyone was in the sports hall in the adjoining building. Seeing as I am classed as a mature student, the last member of staff handed me the keys to the studio, asking me to lock up the floor when I was finished. Everything was normal for the first hour or so. I sat in the small studio with the partition wall to the large studio ajar. Concentrating on my work, I put on the radio and began to sing along. Halfway through singing, I heard the door to the large studio open, then footsteps walking up the side of the partition. Thinking it must have been a member of staff or someone that was lost, I paused my music and said, "Hello?" The footsteps sounded as if they had come up to just behind the opening to the partition and stopped. So thinking I may have startled someone, I popped my head around to look into the larger studio, but no one was there. Shrugging it off, I put my music back on and continued with my work. But the same thing kept happening. The door would open, the footsteps would walk in my direction. Then I would pop my head around and no one would be there. It was early December at about 6 p.m., so outside was almost pitch black, and these noises were beginning to make me feel uneasy. So I decided to lock up the studio and go do some work on the large printer at the end of the hallway. I was a little unnerved still from my experience in the studio, and the floor I was on felt eerily quiet without my radio playing. So I made up my mind to photocopy just a couple more bits, then go home and finish my work on Monday. But as I was photocopying my last page, I heard the door at the other end of the corridor fly open and someone running up the corridor towards the double doors behind me. Nearly jumping out of my skin, I spun around to see who it was, but just like in the studio, no one was there. My grandmother always used to tell me that if a spirit is trying to scare you, you need to stand your ground, then they should stop. So fighting my urge to run, I looked down the corridor and said out loud, "Can you please leave me alone? You're not scaring me." Then, feeling a tad shaky, I turned back to the printer. Unfortunately, my speaking out did not work. I suddenly heard running on the stairs, banging, and the double doors behind me began to open and close a little too violently for my liking. Needless to say, I grabbed my things and ran. I have not been on that floor alone since. This is about a year and a half ago now, but I felt I should share my experience. I was living in an apartment complex in a college town with 3 roommates. Though there was really just the 2 of us, my best friend and I. The other 2 guys always were back at their parents' houses or at work. After a few months of living at this apartment, nothing had really happened to us. We were just normal college students partying and doing schoolwork. After 3 months, we started hearing scratching noises in the wall. We thought it was just rodents or neighbors or something along those lines, but then it got weird. One day when it was just my best friend and me, we were playing Xbox in the living room. We paused and left the controller on the table in front of the couch. We also had a counter by the kitchen and a tall circular table in the corner on the other side of the room. We both go to the kitchen at the same time, and we hear the Xbox controller icon moving on the screen, and the sound that the television makes when you are scrolling was going off. We thought that that was incredibly weird, but probably just the controller sticking. But when we go back in the living room, we find that the controller was now on the high-top circular table. We checked the house to see if anyone was there, and didn't find anyone. We would have seen someone in because the only way in and out of the apartment is through the kitchen. That was really the first thing that happened. Next, I come home from class and unlocked and walked into my room, turned on my television, and walked back out to talk to my best friend who was watching golf in the living room. I put in some food for lunch and walked back into my room and saw something incredibly weird. There was an imprint on my bed like someone was sitting there, but there was no one there. I reached out to try and touch it, and it was incredibly cold. As soon as I reached out, whatever was there disappeared, and the imprint started to fade. I freaked out for a few days after this. I accused my friend of trying to scare me, but he was just as terrified as I was. He was having experiences of his own. His experiences were a little more forceful. He always came in from hanging out with friends around 2 a.m., and he was going into his room when the door leading to his side of the apartment slammed shut in his face. This happened 3 or 4 times and then stopped. He also experienced things moving on their own in his room, like pictures falling over and posters being ripped off the walls. The scariest thing that happened was when we were watching an NBA game. We heard a loud crash coming from his room on his side of the apartment. We were both too terrified to go back there, but I took my phone out and quickly took pictures to try and catch something on film. Nothing showed up. We both finally manned up and went into his room. Everything, and I mean everything, had been lifted off the ground, flipped and turned around and dropped. His bed was all over the floor and his golf clubs were everywhere. We had no idea what to do, but we stuck it out for the last month and then moved out. I never did any research, mostly because the apartment complexes wouldn't tell us anything anyways. I set up cameras multiple times, but nothing showed up on the video. The activities were very random, so it was hard to choose a right night. The complexes weren't built on any cemeteries, but we were really just 400 to 500 meters away from one. Since I've moved out, I haven't had any ghostly experiences, and neither has my ex-roommate who moved into his new apartment.
So, I live in a house at the edge of a small village. The house has 4 bedrooms, although we only use 2 of them as it's just me and my mother who live here. My bedroom is located at the very top of the house, as if it were an attic, and the stairs leading to it cannot be seen from my bed due to them being blocked from view by a wall. Now, I've always heard the occasional bump or creaking of drain pipes, which is relatively normal coming from a 200-year-old house. However, 1 year after we moved in, the sounds became much more frequent, especially in the early hours of the morning. There would be a whole lot of commotion starting at 3 a.m., and then shortly ending at 3:15. At first, I thought this was just the heating setting in. I mean, that's a sensible assumption to make, right? But then things got worse. One night, as I was laying in bed, I heard a scratching noise at the door of my bedroom. Suspecting it was my cat, I jumped out of bed, walked across the room, descended my stairs, and opened the door. But I found there was nothing there. Naturally, I suspected the cat had smelt a mouse and run off in hot pursuit of it. So I slowly turned and crept back up the stairs. Feeling the cold, smooth stone beneath my feet, I got back into bed and checked the time. It was 2:45 a.m. Then I fell asleep again. Exactly 15 minutes later, I was awoken by the sudden slamming of my bedroom door. I could have sworn the room became colder, and my blanket was on the top of the stairs. Again, I left my bed and ran over to get my blanket. However, as I looked down the stairs, fear gripped me. My heart raced, pounding as hard as it could to escape my ribcage. I was looking directly into 2 strange glowing shapes at the bottom of the stairs, which resembled eyes, staring with malice and evil intent at me. The eyes burned into me, searching my very soul and sucking any happiness or confidence that I had right out of me. I felt empty, and a feeling of darkness and fear swept over my entire body. My legs shook where I stood. They were cemented in place, but I defied them and ran straight back to my bed, throwing my retrieved blanket over me. Under the blanket's cavern of safety and warmth, my breath was echoed as I struggled to suck in the thin, blood-cold air. Just as I thought, I must have been seeing things as I heard the slow tip-tapping of bare feet on stone. That creature, that monster, was ascending my stairs. The floorboards in my room creaked like an old tree moaning in the wind. The creak sounded louder and closer. I tried to scream for my mother, who was asleep downstairs, but a feeble, strangled whisper of air escaped my mouth. Suddenly, the sound stopped. I waited 2 minutes. Nothing happened. Slowly, my adrenaline wore off, and I regained my breath. I thought I was safe, but then I heard a swinging sound above my head, and something like a rope being strained by a heavy weight. Slowly, my blanket was pulled off of me against my will. The room was pitch black, but there was something swinging above me. I held onto this swinging object for support and stood up. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the light, I saw what was swinging in front of me. From the ceiling, there hung a rope, and from that rope there hung a woman. Her eyes were empty, and her neck was long as if it were broken. Her face was drained of any color and any sign of life except for her mouth. Her mouth had a huge grin from ear to ear. And as this glowing grin looked at me, the body began swinging violently. I didn't take in any more details. Fear filled me, and again that feeling of darkness emerged. I pushed the body aside and ran. I was halfway across my room. The swinging was growing increasingly violent. I reached the top of the stairs, and the swinging had stopped, and a high, menacing, strangled laugh pierced the air. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, and I could have sworn I heard the sound of 2 pairs of feet paddling down those cold stone stairs. The monster was chasing me. I reached my door and slammed it shut behind me. Then, immediately, I ran to my mother's room. As I hugged her, I felt warmth, safety, and life had rushed back into me. I didn't even try to explain what had happened. I was in shock and wanted to forget about the whole affair, though I doubt this will ever be possible. I never went back in that room again, but every time I passed it, a sense of dread and panic came over me. From time to time, I could swear I saw that large, bright smile out of the corner of my eye, and those evil eyes staring into my soul.
We moved to Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, New York in May 2006, and we left there in April 2008. During the time that we lived there, we had several things happen in our apartment. I'll begin with the very first encounter I had. We moved into our apartment only 24 hours after we arrived because it would save money. We couldn't have our dog lodging with us, and we knew we would be fine just sleeping on air mattresses for a few days. The next morning I got up and decided to get a shower and get ready to run some errands. I was in our bathroom drying my hair at the very back of the apartment when I felt 2 tugs on the back of my shirt. I expected to see my 5-year-old daughter standing there when I turned around, and to my surprise, no one was there. When I got done, I went out into the living room where my husband had both kids and our dog playing on the floor. I took my husband aside and asked him if either of the kids had come in our bedroom, and he said, "No, why?" So I told him, and he just looked at me and said, "Already?" I said, "I guess they wanted to get my attention." After that, I was fully aware of what else may happen, and I rarely questioned anything out of the ordinary. We had knocks on the door with no one waiting to come in. Whenever someone knocks on the door, my dog lets out a grunt instead of a full-blown bark, unless they ring the doorbell. There were several instances of hearing someone knock on the door, and she'd be grunting away, but when we opened it, no one was there. Me or my husband would look to see if anyone was outside or running down the stairs, playing a prank on us, and we never found anyone. Then there were times where she'd be laying on the floor and something would catch her eye. She'd stare and move her head like she was following someone walking around, and then look at me as if to say, "You can't see that?" It was a little unsettling, especially when she watched it move and it appeared to go behind me where I was sitting. The strangest thing that went on was the knocking on my headboard or nightstand right before it sounded like everything in the closet fell off the shelves at once. This never happened when my husband or kids were home. I thought I was dreaming the first time it happened because it seemed weird, like my dreams often are, but when it happened again and again, I knew that something else caused it. It was either in our bedroom walk-in closet or the hallway closet right outside our bedroom. It was 4 or 5 months after we moved in when this happened the first time. I had gotten the kids off to school and went to lie back down for a little while. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I was awoken to the sound of someone knocking on my nightstand right next to my head. It jolted me awake and I looked around my room and no one was there. Then it sounded as if everything came crashing down the shelves to the floor of my closet. I jumped up and ran in there and everything was in its place. Nothing had been disturbed. So I went through the rest of the closets in the apartment and everything was okay. I didn't know what to think of it, but I chalked it up to one of my strange dreams or really noisy neighbors. I told myself it was nothing. Then it happened again right after we arranged the bedroom. Again, I was woken up to the sound of knocking on wood, but it came from my headboard this time. Just like before, it sounded like everything in my closet came crashing down. I go in there to check it out and nothing's out of place. This time it shook me up a little bit, so I called my husband and asked if he could come by the apartment. He was on patrol and wasn't busy, so he came straight home. I explained what I heard and told him this was the second time it happened. So he took a look around and came up with nothing. What could he have done anyway? Shoot at something that you can't see? Things were quiet for a couple of months with no experiences at all. Then one morning, about a week before my brother-in-law passed away in September 2007, I got woken up to the knocking again, but this time it was very loud, and it came from my headboard. It made my bed shake. I sat up and looked around, and then came the crashing sound, but it came from the hallway closet outside our bedroom. We had luggage, rubber maids, kids' sports equipment, coolers, and all kinds of random stuff stacked up in there, and it sounded like everything fell into the closet door. When I finally got the nerve to go look, nothing was out of place. Now it was more of an annoyance than anything, like they were playing a game with me or something. Now it was more of an annoyance than anything, like they were playing a game with me or something. Like most of the past incidents, I was the only one at home except for the dog. We got our orders to move and everything got set up for the 2nd of April 2008. I was wondering if I was going to have anything else happen before we left, or if it would continue to be quiet. I got my answer the day before the movers came. The kids were at their last day of school and my husband was out processing, so I was trying to sleep a little longer. I always get restless before we move and I don't sleep real good to begin with, so I figured I'd rest while I had the chance. Yeah, it didn't happen. I heard the knocking on my nightstand. I didn't even bother getting up. Then came the crashing in my closet. All I could think was I should have expected it. Hey guys, thank you all for watching my video, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. So, as always, I want to give a big thank you to Mr. Shivers for joining me on my Collaboration Tuesday video. Thank you so much, man. You are awesome. And if you want to check out more of Mr. Shivers, go check out his channel or go look us up at darknessprevails.org, where we have gathered with other horror narrators in this one website where you guys can submit your stories and check out our videos as well. We have pretty much become the Justice League or the Avengers of horror narrators at the moment. Well, then again, I think Darkness Prevails would probably be Batman. But anyways, guys, thank you all for watching, and just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.